Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. I am so excited to have Terry Betker from Backswath Management back with us again today. Welcome back.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
I am very excited to talk about our next topic. Is bigger really better? I have this idea someone gave me, and sometimes as business people and as farmers, I have a feeling that we might be obsessed with growth. More land, more cows, more machinery, bigger, bigger, bigger. Do you think that we are obsessed with growth as farmers?
Well, the word is interesting, and I'm not sure if we're obsessed with growth, but I absolutely think it's hugely a topic of focus, and to understand why it is, it could be, it likely is in large part an outcome of the past 10 years or so, where there were times were pretty good for a lot of farms in a lot of areas and a lot of sectors, and perhaps that's been a little bit of the catalyst that's spun this along. But if we're obsessed with growth, yeah, we're definitely focused on it, that's for sure.
Okay. And I have this idea too. I look back at previous generations, and I know as we age and different personalities, we are okay with different amount of risk and debt and all of that. But I look at my grandfather's generation, and correct me if I'm wrong, different generations previous, credit wasn't as easy to come by. And things were just a little bit different. Now, I almost wonder if we're in that instant gratification generation. We want to be bigger, better, just buy more land. They're not making more of it. Right?
Well, the last comment is true. They're not making any more of it. And then so this becomes kind of an interesting discussion because we don't know what's going to unfold in the future.
Yeah.
But if we do look back, we can see that there has been cycles. And cycles where there's been periods where there's more profitability in a farm, where land prices, for example, were maybe more stable. I don't think we've had, at least in the last 50 years, where land prices have gone down a lot. But by my point about some cycles, and we'll see. But my expectation is that we'll go through cycles again, and maybe we're at the start of one now. And then the discussion about is bigger really, really better? It might have made more sense, say 4 or 5 years ago, than it might make now or 2 or 3 years from now. And so really, how I try to understand that is not about is it bigger or better, but is how do we define growth, and then what would be the timing of that growth. So
unpack that.
So growth. Most farms would, if they heard about growth, as we were talking about, they would think about what you said: more acres, more cattle, more quota. But there can be growth in different ways in a business, and there's not the funny thing about this, but I think there's an important aspect of this, Tracy, and that there's really no status quo when it comes to growth. And what I mean by that is let's pick a farm in western Manitoba, and in a certain radius, if there was only one farm that didn't grow, that stayed absolutely or tried to stay status quo, and every other farm around it did grow or did advance. Maybe that's a better word than growth, is it? Advance, because it'd be a broader word perhaps. Then in relative terms, they've fallen behind. That's my point about the status quo growth. So from business, And I absolutely, I want to say right now, I absolutely 100, and I've talked about this, that bigger and bigger isn't the preferred approach. The preferred approach should be better and better.
Okay.
And if you can get to the point on your farm where you have become as efficient as you can in all areas, in operationally efficient, human resource efficient, financially efficient, and then there's an opportunity to grow, well, then we drive more profitability to the bottom line. That's a stronger,
I like that.
That's a stronger platform to launch growth from.
Yes.
But that's not what you're talking about. What you talked about is just more acres because there's more acres there.
Yeah, because
More
we're supposed to grow.
because
We're
we can buy
business
more-
people.
more
Why
growth,
not?
yeah.
We can go to the bank.
Yeah.
We have a strong operation. Why not grow?
Why not grow? And in fact, there's, when you talk about the bank, you talked about the fact that the cost of capital is low, like interest rates have been low. So we could make an argument here that that's been a catalyst for growth. Because
You're right.
2 and 4 or 5% interest over a number of years is pretty attractive.
Yes.
And so what farmers do is, and I don't mean this as it's going to sound perhaps a little bit negative, but I don't mean it that way. But farmers capitalize profit, and they capitalize profit, and then they borrow against it. And so what we end up with larger farms, more capital invested, more debt, and more risk.
Yeah.
And so we have to be mindful of the growth in terms of how it impacts on our financial performance. Okay, so I've already talked a little bit, but I'd like to carry on a little bit because when I get a chance to talk about this, either at the school over here where we teach, or when I'm doing a workshop, or just talking to farms one-on-one, I think it's important to understand how we define growth. So I like to broaden the definition out. So a farm can grow without getting any bigger. They can advance their management practices.
Okay.
And I think that's an aspect of growth. They could internally diversify. They could bring other people into the business, more family members into the business. So oftentimes another generation coming into the family business or returning to the farm requires or warrants growth in the true sense, like more acres. But I get farms now that are wanting to understand how we can become more financially efficient through somebody coming back to the business. Like what opportunities exist within an existing farm when they have somebody coming back from school or into the business, like a daughter or a son, and try to become more financially efficient because we've got more internal resources to work with versus just simply getting bigger.
Right. Maximize what you have.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think as we talk about this here now for the next few minutes here, let's try to, I'd like us to try to focus on that broader definition of growth. What that
I like
would
that.
look like.
I like that. And the reason I want to do this episode, again, I always say I am A-okay throwing myself under the bus because I think we're all very similar at the end of the day. We pretend we're all different and unique and have different thoughts and challenges, but I think at the end of the day, we all want to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to be profitable,
Mm-hmm.
and we all want security. And I think very often, myself as a business person, you go more. If I grow my business, if I grow my farm, that means I have more revenue, everything's going to be better, and I'm going to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a common thing that we leap to. But where I wanted to go with that, even in our business for a marketer, I've seen it where I've added on employees that are supposed to be doing this job and it's supposed to add this much revenue. But at the end of the day, once you take those costs from having that employee, they didn't even quite cover their wage. Now, on our farm, we're at a point where we've had a rapid growth and we're kind of just continuing on. Okay, do we buy the next place and get more
Yeah.
cows?
Yeah.
And then you put the pen to the paper and you go, oh, well, if you do that, then we probably need to hire somebody, which is a whole nother category. because then you have HR issues and more costs. If we add more land and more cows, does that really add to our revenue? Does it accomplish our end goals? What are our end goals? And how does that affect us as people? Our happiness, our health, our relationships. Yeah. So I'm in a neat spot. I was listening to an outlier and that really thinks of these outside ideas. And I was listening to that podcast and they dropped the idea. Why are you growing? Mm-hmm. Whoa, why am I growing? Yeah. Well, bigger's always better, isn't it? And that's why I wanted to bring this episode to the farming world too.
Well, the why is really important.
Yeah.
And if we can understand the why, then how we grow should correlate with that. Oh, there's lots. I mean, I run across farms a lot where there's been growth, and one farm particularly comes to mind. This is actually an Alberta farm, and when we looked at, and so we measure. In this case, we measure the growth through analyzing financial performance.
Okay.
Right? So we looked at their earnings statement, their income statement for the past 5 years, and their revenues had tripled in 5 years. All right, but their bottom line hadn't changed. And so that doesn't make a ton of sense.
Nope.
And they got bigger, but they didn't do it any more efficiently. So then we start within that family, we start to try to talk about, well, why is that, and why were they growing, and they had reasons for it. But there was, in this case, there's 3 brothers in this business. And the one brother was particularly unhappy with the situation.
Okay.
And he said, this is just silly. He said, we're kicking up a lot of dust. But to your point, like, why?
Yeah.
And so then in that case, the growth, while it was well intended, wasn't purposed or didn't have the outcomes that they were hoping. And it's about how we manage that, how we manage the growth is really important. And if the farm is able to manage it and hold on to efficiencies, then sure, it can drive more profit to the bottom line, and we could increase revenue in a business and more financial capacity, and that might enable the next generation to come back into the farm. There's all good reasons why we might want to do it, but just bigger for the sake of bigger isn't the best foundation to work from.
Well, and that's where we were at too, and it really gave me this idea for the episode because we're going through it. And whether we do or don't, it'll be well analyzed. But we looked at it. Do we really need growth right now? We have just done a rapid growth. Mm-hmm. It's taken a lot out of us financially and physically and mentally. We do not have children. There's nobody coming into the operation. What if we just really optimize what we have and work on getting the costs down, getting the revenue a little higher, maybe putting some money in the bank instead of expanding, so that when we're ready, maybe that's 5 years from now, then it's the next growth phase.
Yeah, make a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Interesting concept.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's that too. When we started our farming operation, you're going full force and you're putting in and you're developing, and some things we didn't have to do, like good working facilities, we did because safety is important. Mm-hmm. So we reinvest. Now we're at a place, why don't we maximize instead of grow?
So if we think of growth in the context of strategy, what's the plan, then sometimes what you just said is so profound. Sometimes the best strategy in growth is to pause.
Yeah. And
just take a step sideways. Not necessarily a step back, just a step sideways. And then recalibrate.
Yes.
Get our feet under us. However you want to
take a breather.
Take a breather. And if it's just grow, and so cash flow's a little tight for some farms.
Yeah.
So there might be some opportunities for farms to expand, because some farms are going to maybe give up some rent or not farm as much. So how do the farmers that are more financially able to capitalize on those opportunities may want to take a a good look at the timing of when they would try to bring that on.
Yes.
So it's a really interesting dynamic, but a pause in growth in that strategy, if growth is part of the longer term plan, can be very the strategy can be very strategic, very timely, very beneficial. There's a better word.
I hope so. And we have our plan for the future. And same thing, you know what? Let's just tighten up, maximize, pause.
Yeah. You, I won't, before we move on to the discussion, you raised just like a really important, or you made an important comment, and that was you referred to, the time and the amount of work. And farmers only have so much time.
Yes.
And so if you keep layering on more and more and more, there's less and less time, theoretically, to spend on anything, any of the activities. Sometimes that translates into a little less attention to detail and then a little bit less financial efficiency. And that's to the brothers in Alberta. That's what was going on in their farm. They were way busier, farming more, and they did it at the expense of being as efficient as they once were, and therefore their profit didn't come along with it.
And I think that's probably very common, because you're right, we only have so much time.
Yeah.
We only have so much bandwidth in our brain.
Good point.
Something
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
Something's got to give, right?
Yeah.
At all points. So that's something that I wanted to talk to you about. When we're looking at high growth, and we touched on a lot of it, what are some of those hidden dangers that
Yeah.
farmers run into?
Well, there's the obvious ones, and so the impacts,
Yeah.
the financial impacts or the impacts often where farms are bigger and bigger and not as efficient as they were are on finance and cash flow.
Okay.
So that's where it manifests itself. So those aren't the hidden dangers. To me, the hidden dangers associated with bigger is the capital investment that's required and the debt that's associated with it, and it can all work out, but sometimes if things go sideways, and back to my comment about more investment, more debt, and narrow margins, then the risk exacerbates.
Yeah.
And so the hidden dangers, I think, are captured in the risk. And the risks, see, to me, the risks, not just finance, but we've got human risk. And I'm not meaning about human risk associated with safety. I mean the human risk of what you were talking about is how do we manage this. I think one of the biggest risks facing farms, and it would be especially those in high growth mode, is risk that I refer to as strategic business risk.
Okay.
Because if you let's just pick a farm let's go to this farm, the Alberta farm, that in 5 years doubled in size, and they leveraged that growth. There's a significantly greater risk in that business than there were before. Their strategy was to grow. And if they get the strategy wrong, and we've invested and leveraged that growth, then the outcome potential, the negative potential outcomes can be significant. Another area of the hidden risk, and you touched on this as well, it's in the relationships.
Yeah.
Because I watched this happen, and we are all different, so we all have different tolerances for risk. So I'm going to go back to the risk.
Absolutely.
And where the mantra has been bigger and bigger and bigger, and we haven't advanced our management practices, or maybe have a couple of tough years like 2019, then it can start to impact on the relationships. Now, I'm going to take that one step further. So I think people would be thinking in their minds now, be the relationship within family units. True that. But then we have to manage relationships with suppliers.
Oh.
And sometimes when we're not able to pay our input bill for
Yes.
whatever reason, then that supplier, it impacts on that supplier relationship. So those are
Right.
some hidden dangers, or hidden dangers is a pretty strong word, but
Impacts.
wonderful.
Consequences?
Yeah. Consequences or impacts.
Yeah.
Hidden impacts. Less desirable impacts. Absolutely, I like that word. And the last one that comes to mind to me, and that I love it, the hidden impacts, is where not everybody in the family unit perhaps had the same commitment to the vision
Okay.
that was driving the growth. And as long as everything is ticking along fine, then some of that gets kind of swept under the carpet. But when the so-called chickens come home to roost and we have a couple of bad years, then I've been in meetings where I've heard people in the family unit say, well, I didn't like that idea in the first place.
Oh.
And so those are some of the hidden dangers where it's grow, or bigger and bigger. And yeah.
Well, in prime example too, I mean, I like to share my train of thought and how we were questioning. And the other thing I look at it, I'll be honest, I mean, any business is risky.
Yeah.
Any business out there. You are putting yourself on the line if you get into business for yourself. But I look at it and we're looking at what's next and expanding. And we go, okay, we need the more land, we need more cattle.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to take more time on Anthony, or we got to hire somebody. But I also look, and again, we can talk this back and forth because it's been risky farming since the beginning of time, always will be. But you look at the current political environment.
Right, yeah.
And again, we've always had this, but I must say, I look at what's happening in American politics and trade wars, and I go, is this the time? Do I feel comfortable taking on X many hundreds of thousands of debt to expand my operation in our current political climate? And again, it's probably always been, always will be, but for us, the more you expand, the more risk you have, right?
Can I tell you a story?
Please.
Okay, so and it's absolutely relevant to what you just said. So if you go back to the topic, is bigger better? And we agree that, well, we need to understand the why. So if there's a solid plan or a foundation to why we're going to get bigger, well, then we do it. So my story is, I was at a conference in the States, and it was right after 2008. It was right after the financial collapse down there.
Yeah.
And this conference was a conference attended by mostly American farmers, but some Canadian farmers. And let's say there were 120 farmers at the conference, and they had an economist come and talk about the impact of the financial crisis in the States on farms. And then my story is the facilitator or the presenter at this one part of this conference. He asked the farmers in the room what they were going to do in terms of capital investment as a result of the financial collapse down there. And the one farmer, so a lot of farmers normally pull back, we're not going to grow, we're not going to get bigger. And the one guy stood up and he said, I am going to borrow every nickel I can and expand as much as I can, because he says but my point about the why and how the plan, he said, I view this as an opportunity. And then he was determined that he was going to ramp up and get bigger when everybody else was holding pat. So what my point in that story is that it is about, is bigger really better? And the answer is, I don't think not necessarily, but if we can, if the reasons are right, then you make your best decision and you decide to do it. And that was just another, I've not forgot that. That's stuck with me for 10 plus years now.
I absolutely love that story, because as we're sitting here deciding what's next, what's the next steps, part of our train of thought is, do we tighten up, do we optimize what we have, put some money away so that when opportunity, exactly like you just said, opportunity presents itself, well, we're sitting pretty.
Yeah.
Well, they always say in the stock market, the time to buy is when it's at its lowest, not the highest.
Yeah.
And it's not human nature, right? So I love that example. I mean, that's gold. But you got to do things right and make the right decisions at the right time, is what you're saying.
I am. And so if I don't know that farmer, and it would be really interesting to see what he actually did and how it turned out. But if he went into that strategy, what we're talking about, it being as efficient as he can,
Yeah.
then he launches from a really solid foundation, capitalize on the opportunities.
Excellent. So
Excuse me.
that is good stuff. I wanted to ask you, you work with farmers, and often I believe you're called in to help on decisions of what's next. Do we grow? Do you have some questions? Yeah, we've kind of just chatted about that a little bit, but let's say again, you came to my prime example. Anthony and I invited you out for coffee.
Yeah.
We're thinking of what's next for the farming operation.
Yeah.
Do you have some questions or a framework that you would walk us through to just help us work through that?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I would make sure that we had the business discussion so you knew how much you're going to pay me for that framework. and I'm just teasing here. No, but Tracy, we absolutely do, and I think it starts with a discussion about, well, why are you doing it? What's the future of your farm look like? And if the opportunity to add more cattle or more land helps you along towards your vision, then that's good. If the opportunity is, taking you in a different direction, nothing wrong with that. That's a form of growth as well, but there's different risks associated with that. So the first thing I would want to know is, okay, so with this opportunity, how does it line up with where you see the farm or your business, say 5 years from now? And then in this situation, I would in the process, at least the approach that I would take is I would want to get as best understanding of your financial strengths and weaknesses as we could. Because
That's fair.
If there are some financial inefficiencies or there's some working capital challenges or something in the business that may be of financial concern, I might say to you, you might be better off, again, to get better and better here before we take on something new.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the first two things we would look at, but then let's go to the good picture. Let's say that the opportunity ahead of you is nicely aligned with where you want that farm to be or your farm to be 5 years from now. And your financial situation is quite strong.
Okay.
Pretty darn good. You've done a really good job and have got to a really nice place financially in your business. Well, then the next part of that whole discussion is, okay, we take this on, how are we going to manage it? How are we going to add the business activity to our existing, or the additional activity to our existing business, not at the expense of financial outcomes, but to enhance financial outcomes? So the third thing we would work with you or encourage you to do is get as much clarity as you can on how you're going to manage towards that opportunity. What are your management strengths and weaknesses? What are the 2 or 3 really critically important things that you would need to understand in how you're managing your business and how you could use those to your benefit to take on this opportunity? That's the approach that we would take, in a broad approach.
I like it. It's very purposeful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and a heavy emphasis would be on the financial performance, the financial analysis of the business, and I think especially around the financial efficiency of what you're doing now operationally.
Well, yeah, because if you put on more financial stress on maybe a stressful operation, all right, that might be the straw that broke the camel's back. Is that the saying?
Yeah.
You don't want that.
Yeah, you don't want that. There's a really interesting human dynamic that I see from time to time, and sometimes the farms that have the, and I'm going to generalize here, sometimes the farms that have the weakest financial structure are most prone to take the greatest risks, because it seems to be that sometimes they feel that they're kind of backed into we'll go all in.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not so sure sometimes going all in is the best strategy. But I wonder if there's some human dynamic at play. And I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know that. But just I watch and talk to farms or come across situations where it makes me wonder why certain things get done.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's kind of interesting.
I like it though. I'm so happy you joined us to give your wisdom on the subject. You work with a lot of farmers. You've seen a lot. You're so financially strong. I just love those new ideas. Why? Is bigger really better?
Yeah.
What's the purpose? Is it gonna help us out?
You know, just if again, the only time we will know is, say, 4 or 5 or 10 years down the road. We'll look back and we'll say, yeah, that was the right decision. So there's no way we can create any kind of a placebo measure here. We're only going to know. So if we can make the best decision we can, understand why we're doing this, and then go about it as purposeful as we can, give us the best chance of having good outcomes.
Love it.
Yeah.
Those are great words of wisdom. I think on that note, unless you have anything to add, that is what I wanted to extract from Terry's brilliant mind.
Yeah. Well, as I've said to you before, it's not so much the brilliant mind at play. I have the benefit for a long time here to talk to a large number of farms, and I learn all the time.
Yeah.
And get a chance to over time watch how things have kind of played out, and it's just fascinating to watch and do the work that I do with farm families. So yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you very much for
Excellent.
inviting me in here to talk to you today.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode. If you like the episode, like it, share it, and please subscribe. See you guys next week. Bye.
Bye now.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.